Okay, we are live streaming. So welcome to any community members. We are just waiting on one more subcommittee member and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, so I think Jose is texting with me, so I think he will be here. I think we should go ahead and get started, and hopefully he will be here by the time we need him, or Juliet and I can probably try to uh, help him.
Yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the third meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee. Today is Friday, January 19th, and we will be here from 11:30 to 1. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Juliet and hopefully Jose will facilitate today's meeting. He's on his way. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I'm just going to take a minute to go over some meeting logistics. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A copy of the recording will be posted on the city's transition website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. You can access closed captioning by clicking the CC button on the bottom of your screen. Committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so folks listening in can follow along. Please remember that the chat does become part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Q&A feature in Zoom available. You can submit questions or comments through the Q&A function. We may not be able to answer all questions live in the meeting, but anything you put in there also becomes part of this public meeting's record. At today's meeting, we're not going to be taking verbal public comment, but you can submit public comment at any time through the transition website by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov or by calling 311. And if you do want to give verbal public comment, the next time to do that is at the February 6th meeting of the entire Government Transition Advisory Committee. And with that, we'll go to the next slide and I'll pass it to Juliet to review today's agenda.
Thanks, Julia. My name is Juliet Hyams. I too use she, her pronouns. And today's agenda includes subcommittee business, our budget recommendations letter, future council and district operations, future council districts and offices, and onboarding of new council members. And before we adjourn our meeting today, we will agree to next steps. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to look at the Zoom and mine at the same time. Lori is unable to attend today's meeting, and Destiny and Terry don't have power this morning, and we are still expecting Jose. We need to approve the December 12th meeting summary. Please note that staff has already corrected the misspelling of Amy's last name. And does anyone have any other corrections?
I just have a misspelling to point out too on page 3. Within recommendations for standing committees, I shared as at the cities reviewed, there were several non-standing committees to work on things like the budge. It should be budget, just a misspelling to correct.
Thanks, Zach. Is there anything else? If not, I'll take a motion to approve. or accept the meeting summary?
This is Zach. I move to approve.
Okay,
Second.
motion by Zach, second Juanita. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Julia, just maybe if we can go back and just make sure that we can get folks to raise their hands.
Oh,
or
sorry about that. Yeah,
thumbs
let's
up on the meeting summary.
show of hands to approve the meeting summary. Okay, was that everybody? I can't see everybody
Yeah.
at one time.
You're good, thanks.
Okay. Okay, next slide, please. A final order of subcommittee business is to review the working agreements. The working agreements state as follows. In discussions, challenge ideas rather than individuals and offer constructive suggestions. 2, approach different opinions with curiosity and seek to understand them. 3, keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. 4, arrive on time and be prepared to the best of your ability. Let the group know if you are unable to attend a meeting. And the co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers. 5, keep multitasking to a minimum. 6, keep focus on the objectives of the meetings. And use the co-chairs to note additional topics for discussion by submitting those topics in writing via email. And next slide, please. Continuing on, point 7 of the working agreements is to honor the decisions of the group. 8, contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meets your needs. Step up and step back, collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. 10, embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate various feedback tools. And 11, use I statements. Next slide, please. We wanted to remind everyone of our subcommittee's timeline. We are currently in a period of collecting and evaluating data and information. As we move through today's agenda, please keep in mind that we are rapidly approaching the next phase of our work to gather input in February and March, and that onboarding is on a more accelerated timeline with recommendations due this spring. Next slide, please, and I will turn it over to Jose if he's available. Otherwise, I could cover his slides. Julia. There he is.
Yeah. I'm available, but I have a guest. So you might want to do the first couple of slides and I'll take over later. My childcare cannot make it here in the ice. So I have to take care of him until Steve gets off work.
I have one too, so.
Welcome.
I think this is my item. Julie, do you want me to get started on it?
No, I'm happy to like tee it up a little bit and then Zach, I'll turn it over to you if that's okay.
Sure.
I just want to give a little bit of context for, especially for community members listening in. So at the last January 10th meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee, a motion passed directing this subcommittee to discuss and draft a letter to the mayor and city council that did the things on this slide. So 1, recommends that the budget for council staffing be increased to be in line with staffing levels of peer cities. 2, acknowledges the need to better staff for community engagement. 3, acknowledges budgetary constraints and offers suggestions of how the council operations budget could be reallocated to fund said staffing. And 4, is delivered by February 16th, 2024, so that it will be considered in the budgeting process. So the draft letter needs to be distributed to the full committee on January 30th, a week before the February 6th committee meeting, so that the committee has time to review it and consider it before we meet. So appreciation to Amy and Juanita and Zach and Terry, who volunteered to propose a draft letter to help accelerate this subcommittee's consideration. So we have about 25 minutes on the agenda today to discuss this letter, which I know is not a lot of time, but we have a lot of other items to get through. And so we're going to try to move through this as efficiently as possible. And the goal is that we would leave this agenda item with agreement amongst those who are here that volunteers between meetings can go ahead and take a stab at revising the letter based on any agreed upon revisions that we talk about today. So we did ask everyone on the subcommittee to come prepared with any questions or proposed revisions to the draft letter. But before we get there, we do want to give the drafters a few minutes just to kind of provide an introduction or some context to the draft that they proposed. And Zach, I believe, I don't know if you volunteered or were voluntold to do that on behalf of the drafters. So go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, sure. Well, so to honor as much time as we can for discussion, I just wanted to tee it up and let you know, give some insights into the decisions that we made in drafting this first version. So the author team used a liberal definition of council staffing. So while the city budget office has only classified the council staffing as council aides who directly report to councilors, we considered the staffing levels of the shared council staff and other supports necessary for a functioning city council in this letter. So in other words, we brought attention to what we perceive as insufficient staffing levels for the council, but also for committee operations and legislative support, which would include what's in the city administrator's office, but also the lack of additional staff for the presiding officer, which will be the council president and vice president. There's an absence of staffing adjustments in city clerk's office and city attorney's office to support committee business, that kind of thing. We did decline to wade deeply into where this funding can be found. I just want to, in my research and recognizing that the city budget office has outlined several strategies for council to consider already in their budget work session to date. And so we largely deferred to their expertise in this matter. And then finally, we generally showed restraint in elaborating on staffing for improved community engagement, acknowledging the role of council operations and this council staffing for community engagement. But there's obviously important roles for the potential of district offices, district coalitions, and place-based city programs, which we allude to but don't speak to in great detail. So speaking kind of only on my behalf here, I believe this recommendation for improvements to community engagement would be better served as a standalone targeted letter about the work of civic life. DSB issued RFP on new district coalitions and budgeting for district offices or some level of in-district events such as town halls. So with that, and having hopefully seen the document, I'm open to answering questions, or I'll take notes to try to document for our revisions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Zach. Before we do, let's hear from everyone who was not on the drafting team. And we'll kind of do a round robin, and let's take everyone's questions or proposed revisions, and then let's open it up for discussion, if that's okay. And yeah, Zach, if you want to help kind of make sure we're capturing people's questions or proposed revisions, I can help with that too. So I'm just going to suggest that we go alphabetical order by folks' first names. So we're going to go Joe, Jose, Juliet, and then I'm prepared to share on behalf of Lori. And if folks can be as succinct as possible so we get through these, and you don't need to share minor changes, those have been already put into the draft itself. So Joe, go ahead if you're open to it.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to say great job to the people who worked on this. I mean, it's a really fine letter. I do think, and there were a couple of comments to this effect, that somebody ought to take a final sort of red pen to it for style so that it reads as well as it can, not to affect the content. We'll do that today, but somebody ought to do a final edit for style. The only comment that I made that I really want to press is I think we should consistently in every communication refer to ourselves as GTAC. We're sort of establishing an identity and a brand and not the committee. And the one substantive thing I want to ask is one member of GTAC at the discussion last week, and this is certain to come up again and again, asked why not add staff members by district rather than by individual council member. And I think we need to be prepared to respond to that because that's a natural thing for people to say. For me, a large part of the intent of the charter change was to get a diverse and representative team of council members, and they need support to fulfill the high expectations for engagement and district representation. That's it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for modeling succinct information. Let's see, Jose, are you prepared to go?
Yes, although I might have to run out in just a second. I think it's a good letter, and I've been trying to really think about how to shorten it because the one thing I have about it is that the letter to me seems way, way, way too long. But I don't have very good recommendations on how to do that, except maybe pull out the appendixes and tables and actually make them seem like it's separate. So instead of just having a continuation, just have the letter end and have a note to see attached appendixes for research. But yeah, that's all I got. I think the rest of the information is really good.
Thank you so much, Jose. Juliet.
Yeah, I concur with much of that. I do think we should go by GTAC. They know who we are now, and they have so many other committees that I don't think the generic version serves us as well as GTAC. I agree that it's a kind of long, and I would volunteer to be the red pen person. I think I could shorten it and tighten it up without sacrificing any content. And then finally, I'll note that I was one of the no votes about this in the last meeting. And one reason was I felt like I just didn't know enough and it was going too fast for me. And I feel much more comfortable and I'm prepared to support it now. That's it.
Thank you, Juliet. I'm going to share on behalf of Lori, who had a conflict today. So she has two. One is now repetitive. It is just to tighten up the language. And I think she said significantly tighten up the language. She did offer a set of ways to do that. And I dropped those into the document because each one is kind of minor in itself, but collectively, I think it adds up to a substantive recommendation. And then the second one, probably maybe in need of more discussion, is providing specific recommendations. So for individual counselor staffing, she believes we have enough information and agreement to propose a number, which is not in the letter. And then in terms of the shared council staffing, right, like council operations, the legislative support, that side of it, you know, I guess she's kind of wondering, like, are there policy choices that you all need to make and consider as a group that would then allow you to make a specific recommendation? So those are her two. Are there folks who were on the drafting side, and I guess Zach, you sort of had one about a second letter, that also have proposed revisions or recommendations that you want to make? Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just echo the comment about shortening it. We tried, and I think that we as a group need to decide on what is our like 1 or 2 points we're trying to make with this letter. So we as like a drafting group can take out and like put more in appendixes. Because there's so much research and data, and I think the struggle we were having was that the reason we're making these recommendations is because we've done this research and there's a lot of actions that the council is presently taking, like the budget they presently made. And we felt like without documenting that stuff, it was like hard to make the case that like it's because of the way that you've proposed this right now. So suggestions or thoughts about how we can just lock in on one single point and then put the rest on appendices. And from my opinion, the point that we're trying to make is that based on this research, this council isn't adequately staffed to do what it's set out to do. And kind of that.
Thanks, Amy. Juanita, did you have any proposed revisions, recommendations?
No, I just want to thank the group for the feedback. I agree, I agree with the feedback. It's very helpful. And some of us talk about it, some of these issues too, but as Amy was saying, it was difficult because we have so much information, what to pick and choose to do it. But I just want to make a comment that one of the responses that I have had before is that when we offer recommendations is that we have to wait until the new council gets seated and for them to make those decisions regarding things, like staffing or community engagement. I truly believe, and I think the group does believe too, that it's important that we start setting a foundation right now as we move into the process of changing the city council, the new people sitting in, because if we don't start setting the foundation, it's going to take years for this new group of people who don't know the system, who have no experience. And so it's critical that we stick to the chart, to the changes in the chart. And no, it's not the charter, I'm sorry, and the charter. So we start setting that foundation. I just want to make that comment because I think that it's important that we're very clear about what are we trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Zach, can you repeat? It sounded like you had a recommendation that I couldn't tell if it came from the drafters about there being a second letter. Could you repeat that one? And then if there's any other recommendations or revisions you have.
Sure. It's more of a recommendation of my own and thinking about this discussion today and acknowledging, the inclusion of talking about community engagement as being a core piece of this recommendation, that it operates kind of in an ecosystem that is inclusive of council offices, but has many other facets to it that we as a subcommittee, thinking about districts as well, should be considering, and maybe a separate recommendation that speaks to a request, or maybe we have specific recommendations of what kind of staffing is necessary for improving community engagement writ large in this kind of new 12-member council and new districts.
And anything else beyond that for you?
No, I appreciate the feedback and recognize the deficiencies of the letter given the timeline and the difficult conditions of writing with people with power outages and the like. So I hope that you all see that this is more of like a throw all the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, and encourage those of you who are not part of the writing portion to take a red pen and make your revisions with a little bit more assertiveness if you wish.
Yeah, so let's kind of go back through. I mean, I think there's alignment around this idea of tightening up the language, shortening the letter, calling it yourselves GTAC. I do want to just kind of in response to Amy's question around a way to help tighten or shorten is being clear on what like the one or two points that we're trying to convey are. If folks have any suggestions on Amy's question or any other suggestions that other folks haven't already made on ways to shorten or tighten, let's take those and then we'll move on to some of the more substantive proposed revisions. Amy, go ahead.
Well, I just want to second Zach's recommendation that this be a series of letters and or we as a committee just get into the habit of writing recommendations.
Yes.
So we're just producing these on like sort of a regular basis, like sort of reporting out on our findings as it's timely. So that's all I'll add, is that we should write subsequent letters.
Okay, let me just go back though. Any other ideas, suggestions that folks want to offer on the shortening, tightening piece? I mean, I know that we have agreement, we need to do it. Just real quick, I want to close that loop. Juliet, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking back at the letter now, but I think we could use some subheads at the top that would help with what Amy's talking about. I mean, that could just be our subhead at the top, or it could be I mean, you already have it in the subject line. So I think you still could break it up with a couple of subheads that would make sure they see that. And I could experiment with that a little bit.
Okay, fantastic. So I think there's just a few then kind of, oh, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead. Joe, you're muted.
Sorry. I just wanted to say I'd like to follow up on Juliet's offer to, have one good set of eyes go through this, make another recommendation purely for style. I like Amy's suggestion, and if we're going to be writing a series of recommendations, it would be good if we can sort of get our format down so we don't have to reinvent it each time.
I agree.
And I guess since I've got the mic for a moment, I also want to say, and this isn't exactly shortening by more than a few words, I think council's been very clear about what they want from us and what they don't want from us. And we shouldn't give them advice about where to find the funds. We should simply tell them this is the staffing level that's required for the council to be effective. And if they want to ask us to review the budget in detail, we may accept that. But they've told us so far that they don't want us to get into things like that.
Thank you, Joe. Jose.
I'd also be really open to getting the key points and maybe making a very short letter that then says explanations attached, that has the bigger substantive sections as attached to the appendixes, just so they can read those points. And if they want to know why we came to those conclusions, then they can read the explanation. That would shorten it substantially, I think.
Thank you, Jose. So I have a lot of good ideas from folks on the shortening, tightening. I'll put them all together, and Juliet, I imagine I speak for the group that we would take you up on your offer to take a stab at the shortening, tightening part. So let's move on. I'm going to take the Zach's next on the kind of already preparing for another letter that would be that you would recommend this as a subcommittee at the February 6th full committee meeting, that you all start working on a second letter that is recommendations around community engagement, including council offices, but beyond council offices as well. And I know Amy already kind of spoke to that. Can folks kind of maybe raise their hand, Zoom hand or your actual hand, and let me know if that's something you agree with? Juliet, I don't see you. Oh, okay, so that's all of.
We're agreeing to do it, not volunteering to do it, right?
Absolutely, that's right. We can't go, we don't want to go ahead and do anything. It would be a recommendation at this point that you would make to the full committee on February 6th. Great. Let's take Joe's, I think Joe, I mean, correct me if I'm getting you wrong, but Joe's around proposing a revision that the letter specifically addresses why, or maybe you meant to the committee just at large, but why you all are recommending additional staff per counselor versus per district. Joe, did you mean that to put it in the letter or just to be able to speak to it at GTAC?
No, I think it really is a sort of response, although I said it before she did, to Amy's suggestion that we be very clear about what our points are. And I think we ought to make the point, and then we ought to support the point. One point I think we ought to make is there should be 2 staff members per council member, and our reasoning for that. And then I don't think we've agreed on, how many sort of core shared staff there should be, but when we do, we should explain our reasoning for that. I think we're all in agreement that there should, in addition to that, be 1 per district, which I think is going to be largely an administrative function because there's going to be a lot of moving parts per district.
Got you, Joe. So that actually, I think, is a beautiful segue into the last thing that came up here. And I'm not going to do a great job of being Lori, but this question of specific recommendations. So like Joe just said, moving from 1 staff per counselor to 2, that's not actually in the letter. And I think Lori was asking, like, why aren't we making a specific recommendation? So can I get folks' thoughts on that? Amy?
My personal opinion about not making a recommendation on that is that it's kind of beyond the scope of what of the very nugget of the point we're trying to make. The nugget of the point we're trying to make is just that the present staffing is not even close to any peer city in any direction. So I just advocate for not including it because it's like the council, to Joe's point, I think the council has been emphatic that they don't want us telling them what to do on these certain things or things that the council should be deciding. So it's not really us saying it needs to be this many. It's us saying no other city is organized like this. How is this going to work? We're really asking a question with our letter.
Thanks, Amy. Juanita, and then Jose.
Yes. Yeah, I kind of feel like we were talking about offering recommendations in terms of setting up a foundation for a structure that is going to be supportive of the role of the new council. I feel like we should be making recommendations. I also want to advocate for not only for that, but also in terms of setting a foundation for a strong grassroots community engagement in each of the districts. We have to advocate for staff that will play that role. I understand that it's going to be centralized because it's citywide, but the real grassroots work in terms of engaging the community is going to take place in the districts. That's exactly why we have now 4 districts, because that has never happened before, because it's so centralized just in the city, and it doesn't go out into the communities. So to me, I have a strong recommendation to the group that, yeah, we need to do a specific recommendations, but we need to not forget about the infrastructure that needs to be developed from the beginning, from now, to ensure that we have community engagement. And that is going to require at least 1 person per district, in addition to the legislative or administrative support that they're going to need.
Thank you, Juanita. Jose?
Yeah, I agree that giving a specific recommendation might be best. I think a reason that we didn't include it is that we are all on a different page as to what that recommendation should be. We all agree it should be more, but we all have very different ideas of how that more should look like. So that's why we kind of landed on just saying more, because we all agreed on that part. Just to give a little background onto why it wasn't included in the first place. And I think that might be a conversation that may take longer than we have time for, and I'm not sure we'll be able to come to an agreement. Because everyone does look at that piece of it very differently.
Thanks, Jose. Juanita, did you have something else, or is your hand up from
Oh, no,
earlier?
no, sorry, I need to take it down.
That's okay. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts on this, whether there should be specific recommendations? Sorry, a specific number of staff proposed.
This is Zach. I guess I agree with Amy that like putting a specific number out there, it's like putting our neck out a little bit, and also in an unnecessary way. And we're talking about a constricted budget anyway, and so I think it's setting us up to fail and setting the council up to fail. I don't know. I feel a little bit weird about specifically. I think we can champion the existing org chart and the level of discussion that went into that. But to go further or shallower of what is staffed in that org chart, I think is not our role, or would take too long.
Thank you, Zach. Joe.
So this is a genuine question. If not us, who?
Exactly.
If we're saying that we want more, who do we expect to respond to that and do the work that we're not prepared to do? Seems to me that this is something that we could take on and in pretty short order come to agreement and make a specific recommendation, and that would underscore the work that we've done rather than simply saying more.
So I do think this is the last item on the letter. I'm going to maybe take a bit of a privilege here. I mean, it was a proposed, having a specific recommendation for the number of staff per counselor was a proposed revision of Lori's. So I think I'll call the question, if that's okay. And maybe, so the question is, and I don't know if you would need to land on the number, right? I mean, because again, GTAC as a whole committee will ultimately be the ones approving the recommendations in the letter. But could I get a show of hands of who thinks that GTAC should come up with a specific number of recommended staff per counselor? And I'll be Lori. Lori, Joe, Juliet, Juanita. So that is 4 people, which is not a quorum of this subcommittee, which would be 5 people, and we don't have 3 people here. So I think what I would suggest is maybe this is a question for consideration. Just a topic that you all bring up when you present the letter to GTAC on February 6th. Does that sound okay? Yeah, okay. So it's really shortening, tightening. Juliet's going to take a stab. I think we probably welcome other folks kind of getting into the letter, and if you want to make specific recommendations around shortening, tightening, please do so. Recommending that GTAC move forward with a second letter about community engagement. Did I miss anything on the letter? Great. So we are going to move on. Would be the next slide. And Jose, do you want to jump back in?
Yeah, sorry, I can go ahead if you guys don't mind occasional cries in the background. But we are gonna shift a little focus now to our work to date, and we're gonna go through each element of our subcommittee scope of work, beginning with the future council and district operations. And for this item, we're gonna review the data and information to date, hear about new research members conducted, review some community input, and identify our next steps. So please hold any questions and comments until we have gotten to the next steps portion of this item. Next slide, please. First, we want to briefly evaluate the data and information collected to date. And based on what we know so far, the current evaluation of the data and information suggests that we would have 6 committees plus 1 for the committee of the whole, each with a chair and a vice chair, and either 4 or 6 council members total, including alternates. Each committee would have a member from all 4 districts, and each council member is either a chair or a vice chair of a committee, and every council member serves on the same number of committees. Next slide, please. The 6 committees, plus 1 for the committee of the whole, could be, as listed up there, committee of the whole, government performance and finance, public health and public safety, transportation and infrastructure, community development, sustainability and climate, housing and homelessness. Next slide, please. The first round of research was kind of thin understanding how others provide public input, especially in council committees. Of the information, public input is made available like a normal council session where people can sign up to provide public testimonies. In some cases, the decision to have public testimony during committee business was at the discretion of the committee chair, or only if there was a decision to be made in committee. Next slide, please. After the last subcommittee meeting, members agreed to collect new data and information, and I'll call on folks to succinctly share their findings. Oregon statutes that relate to council committees include the Budget Committee, which is the governing body of the council, the Land Use Appeals, which is handled by the governing body, and the Planning Commission that cannot be council or council committee. This information has been added to the written document on our work to date. Terry and Destiny researched common components of the committee rules from other cities and opportunities and methods for the public to provide input, either a committee or council meeting. The research has been put in the research folder. We're going to ask them to provide a written summary of the research in our written document. Tate and Diana, is there anything you want to share on this slide?
No, this is all great. Thank you. I don't have anything further to share. This is helpful.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, we've also asked June to share any community input that relates to this item.
Thanks, Jose. So I looked through all of the public comments that we've received throughout the last several months since, I believe, last February. And so these are the comments that got pulled out relating to council operations, noting that a lot of this came when the Code 3.02 came out, there was public comment. And so really just like a lot of these comments, they're also embedded with the context of what's been out for public comment or what was sort of the big decisions that were being made. So I think a huge kind of theme that came up when looking at community input was that folks were providing comments and suggestions that would enhance collaboration for policy and budget development. So lots of folks talking about, proposing the composition of committees, that had a council member from each district so that there's citywide thinking into the work, finding places of shared leadership. And then there are also folks who were, looking at deputy city administrators, and so the administrative side of the work, and wondering how we can kind of structure some collaboration between city council members and council committees, for example, and the actual on the ground work of the administrative side of things. So how does that collaboration work? And then the last piece that I thought I'd bring up is that some folks also talked about how when we think about this new expanded legislative council, it's going to require more specificity on committee structure and operations. So being able to have folks understand how this operates is going to be important for the effectiveness of council operations. So that's all I have.
Thank you, June. Perfect. As a reminder, we want to consider what work needs to be done before we gather public input and no later than March 2024. Some questions we may want to consider are, do we need to further evaluate existing data and information? As a reminder, we'll ask Terry and Destiny to summarize their research on common council rules and ways to gather public information in council committees. Is there new data information we need to collect? Do we need to gather input from the city? If so, what are the questions and who are the stakeholders? And finally, do we know what policy choices to present to community for their input? So, okay. Does anyone have any comments about that or anything they'd like to add or say? Juanita?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I want to go back to the point about the connectivity or interconnectivity between the council operation and the my goodness, the districts, because we had to look at them as something that it is interconnected, and we need to look at it together. I'm afraid that, and again, it's only my perception, and I may be totally wrong, but it seems like we're going into these little pieces that are separately. And when we talk about, in some of the conversations that we had in the meeting when we were drafting the letter, we talk about the city of St. Paul. The way they have 7 districts because they have 7 city councilors, and each of those districts develop their own neighborhood or district plan every year. So they do develop this district plan or neighborhood plan, and this plan is reviewed by the city planning committee, the city council, and the metropolitan council before it's approved by the city council and becomes a formal part of the city plan, the citywide plan. So the information is coming directly from the grassroots up instead of up and down the way it is right now. So they also play other roles. Is it a community engagement group or is a district committee to review community development proposals, advocate for parks and recreation improvements, just the regular things that right now the neighborhood coalitions are doing in Portland. But the fact that they get adding the more formal role of having to present a plan, and that's what I keep on coming back about the need to provide staff in the district level for the cities, for these districts to be really functional. So I just want to go back because I don't see anything in this, and maybe I'm not misunderstanding it very clearly, but I don't see any in the committees or anything. I don't see any place where community engagement is located, or even in the organizational structure that was approved by city council. So I feel like we need to go back and look at a whole picture, because again, this committee specifically is called, we are working with the Geez, I forgot the thing. Okay. Yeah, we're working with the city council operations, but also with the district operations. So it's together. I hope I'm making sense of what I'm saying. I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to say. We need to keep on looking as a whole picture as we making recommendations and looking in the vision based on what the charter is saying that wants to happen.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Juliet?
So are we holding our comments about districts until the next topic? Is that what you're suggesting, Julia?
Well, then, yeah, the next, we're kind of on council operations, and then the next slide will transition into your next area of work as a subcommittee, which is future council districts and offices. So if they're about like what, following up on Juanita's point, I do recommend we hold them.
Thank you.
Okay, that's what I'll do. Thanks.
Thank you. I apologize for taking the time. Oh, shoot.
Joe?
Yeah, this is a question. The 6 committees don't obviously to me line up with the 6 areas that the council adopted in the org chart. And I wonder, you must have thought that through. I mean, one simple-minded approach would be to have 6 committees, each of which are related to those 6 areas in the org chart, each of which has bureaus and deputy city manager or city administrator and so on. So what was your thinking in not aligning those? Or am I missing something and they really are aligned?
I think I'm the only one who participated in that research and recommendation, with Lori and Terry absent. So I'll do my best to try to reflect that. We kind of, instead of looking internally and having that be the rationale for what the committee should be, we were looking primarily external as their specific committees. I do think in as it pertains to alignment, I don't see it being a disadvantage to not have them perfectly aligned to like 5 buckets that the current city council. Can everybody hear me okay now, or is it okay? I think that the main thing is I don't see a problem in there not being a perfect alignment of how the current city council has set out the 5 buckets of priority areas, because I do think that there are overlaps in some of these priority areas where, say, fire should be really also involved in conversations around housing with a fire marshal, and Portland Street Response currently being under Portland's Fire and Rescue Bureau. So I think there's a lot to be said about having diversity in model so that council can encourage less siloing within those like kind of bucket areas that council has created for deputy city administrators to oversee.
So let me just respond and say, I think the council has 2 fundamental responsibilities. One of them is legislative and the other is oversight. And I think for the legislative purposes, your argument makes sense to me. For the oversight purposes, it seems to me that having some sort of closer alignment between the bureau structure and the committee structure might help the council exercise its oversight function.
Thank you, Joe. Tate, did you want to say something or no?
No, I don't, as staff, I want to let you all have free flowing conversation. I don't want to interrupt too much, but I'm happy to speak to our own internal discussions about policy choices when the time's appropriate.
Please, it certainly helps.
Thank you. Well, you all have been doing amazing work. internally, Diana and I have both been recognizing through the code update work and the council operations work, you know, we're primarily working with like 2 to 3 deputy city attorneys that are very talented, very smart, but completely overwhelmed. So I think we're all a little ahead of how much they can do. So your work is so helpful. When we met this week, we could agree on 2 clear policy choices that are really relevant to this discussion. And that's really how many standing committees would be ideal for the future council, and what recommended topics should those standing committees focus on, why or why not. And you're touching on the nuances of that conversation. I will say, in concern of the staff numbers that we are starting out with, and not that those won't increase with the fiscal year 2025-26 budget, but with our current staff levels compared to other cities, as you know from your research, I'm worried that we can only support 4 committees reasonably starting out. So I'd be interested in this group's perspective on what would be the priorities to start out with, or any of your thoughts on that.
Thank you. And that certainly gives us more to think about. But let's move on for now. Next slide, please. The next element of our subcommittee's work is future council districts and offices. For this item, we will review the data and information to date and hear about new research members conducted, review community input, and identify next steps. Next slide, please. First, we want to briefly evaluate the data information collected to date. Based on what we know so far, the current information suggests that we acknowledge the inconsistencies of cities with district representation and there being an active ongoing in-district office, recognize the considerable cost burden of running an in-district office year-round. In many cities we researched found some creative ways to encourage or incentivize in-district business if without an in-district office, such as town halls, pop-up offices, and partnerships with existing community assets to reduce capital costs. Encourage the current cost evaluations underway by facilities team to assess the capital and ongoing costs that running and operating in-district offices would entail, but suggest greater creativity in conceptualizing what council offices outside City Hall should be, considering things such as joint district offices or more simply line item budgeting for offsite security for short or long-term stints outside of City Hall. Next slide, please. After the last subcommittee meeting, members agreed to collect new data and information. I'll call on folks to succinctly share their findings. Julia and Zach on conversations with cities that have in-district offices, how they use the offices and what other locations for constituent relations. And then I'll share on how council offices outreach to community and perform constituent relations in peer cities, regardless of in-district offices. So let's see, Julie and Zach, is there anything you want to say right now? Juliet?
Yeah, so I just, before this meeting, I talked to the city of Denver, and they have district offices, and they have both counselors elected both by district and at large. And I could go over my notes with that. It was pretty about that from that, and it was pretty illuminating. I mean, I could just do it quickly. I know we only have 25 minutes left. Or I could send it out to everyone, but basically, you know, this may be an argument for part of the argument for more staff, because it sounds like they have staff both in their satellite offices, which is what they call them, and at City Hall. And kind of like what facilities told us, they have a hoteling space at City Hall, but the staff really don't like to use it. They're more likely to go sit in on the dais in council chambers and work. And I think it's because they have some of their supplies and information there that they can draw on. And so I have one more person to talk to that she referred me to in Denver. But basically, you know, and I said, how do you, I asked her a lot of questions, but I said, what do you do with your onboarding to kind of encourage cooperative relationships and collaboration in these districts? And she said, well, we can't really prescribe that, but she thought the thing that helped them most. And I said, do the counselors, you know, engage in any social interaction? She said, well, the ones who did are all the ones who didn't run again, and they had their election in July. And that, you know, they have a new group now and they're hoping to foster that. But she said, even more important than that is the staff getting together and getting to know one another and supporting one another. And that's really where the action takes place. And so that was really one of her recommendations. And there's a lot more to this conversation, but it does sound like it's working well there, but it also sounds like they have more staff. So I would, that's my summary for the moment.
Thank you. And I will say on outreach to community and constituent relations, it was hard to find a lot of information on council websites. There was a lot more information on the individual council members, like Instagram pages and things like that, where they do events in district, but they're not all specific to them. So sometimes they're just joining an event. I did see a couple of cities where they do office hours in different places at different times, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month, as well as town halls. I know we mentioned that before, but even in places that had some council members doing the office hours in different places in their district, I didn't see consistency because I saw that information being shared by one or two of the council members, but not all of them. So I'm not sure if they, and I didn't have time to go to every single person's Instagram and web page to check it all perfectly, but the information that was easy to find, it wasn't consistent. So I know they're doing things out there, but I'm not sure it's depending on the district, what the constituents would find sufficient. I guess it would be up to talking to each individual person to see what they would think. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. We also asked June to share any community input that relates to this item. June?
Great, thanks everyone. So I think again, just to explain a little bit more of the context where the public comments came out from, a lot of these came from the proposed organization chart during that time. Really in regards to a lot of folks talking about the placement of neighborhood associations within them. Also, during the salaries of city council, or sorry, salaries of city officials in that public comment period. And I also think that we tend to see that when we get comments from GTAC going out into community and this question coming up. So I think that's where a lot of these comments come from. So I wanted to share what a summary about was in the what were in the comments. So there are mixed opinions on whether the new or current council should implement district offices. So there are some who proposed interim offices, and some said that this shouldn't be a priority and that this decision should fully rest with the new council. A lot of folks suggested locations for a district office if we would have them. A lot of them included city-owned properties. There's mixed opinions on locating them in district coalition offices. As some folks had pointed out, that neighborhood association offices are not grouped with neighborhoods. And so, and this is in the context of the org chart that in the org chart that city council and the neighborhood associations are sort of living in different places on the org chart. And then the last one is that generally most folks had said that they like the idea of in-district offices and that they would make the city more accessible. I will say that's a lot of what we've heard around East Portland. And so ideas had included East Portland City Hall, and then other configurations of how city councilors could work together, and really reach their constituents. So I will end there. Pass it back to you, Jose.
Thank you, June. And I see Amy and Juliet's hand up, but I'm gonna get through the slides real quick because we only have 5 minutes left, and then I'm gonna go to you guys. So so as a reminder, we want to consider what work needs to be done before we gather public input and no later than March 2024. Some questions we want to consider are, do we need to further evaluate existing data information? Is there new data and information we need to collect? Do we need to gather input from the city? If so, what are the questions and who are the stakeholders? And finally, do we know what policy choices to present to community for their input? Now we have about 5 minutes, so I'll take a few comments. Amy?
One thing I wanted to just highlight or elevate in the conversation of our findings so far with district offices was the concern on the part of safety, both from our own facilities team and also from other cities that we've spoken to. That seems to be a consensus as to the main barrier. It's not even like funding or anything like that. It's like purely safety and security of the counselors. So I think that's like an important thing to bring into the conversation, because it is like a huge factor that is something we're not really bringing into the conversation yet.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Ultimately, all of it does go back to budgeting because safety is a concern, but if you had the budget, you could make any place safe. So yeah, but safety is a big thing. I know that for sure. Juliet?
Yeah, so quickly, I'm doing a presentation to my neighborhood association on Monday, and you may have heard me say they haven't had an in-person meeting since COVID started. So I finally got my meeting owl in my meeting room, and it should be kind of a new day for them. And meanwhile, this editorial came out in our neighborhood paper, basically faulting both the city and the neighborhoods for not figuring out everything we're talking about or some of what we're talking about. So I'm really going to put it to them on Monday that they need to be actively figuring out what it is they want, how these offices could work. We haven't seen the RFP yet, as far as I know, for the coalitions. There was a District 4 meeting at my coalition that I didn't even know about. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to put in their RFP, but it doesn't really address what I've been concerned about or what Juanita was saying, which is closely related. I think the RFP is part of the puzzle that we don't have yet, and that could be part of gaining budgetary efficiencies. So anyway, any more structure that I could bring to that conversation on Monday, and I'm going to go back through these slides and pull some things out, would be helpful, because they're just so focused on the day-to-day issues of the neighborhood that I think everybody's waiting for someone else to figure it out. That's it in a nutshell. So thank you, Jose.
Thank you. And I will say this is what I consider one of the most important parts of the conversation that needs to happen, and it's come up a lot, maybe because I live in far east side and we're really far from City Hall. Out here, everyone hears the concerns, the safety, the budget, and they think that district offices are more important than that. And something we've talked about at our other meetings is when we say we don't have the budget, what we're really saying is that we don't want to prioritize that item more than something else, because we have budget. We just have to prioritize it differently. So if we think this is somewhere where we want to put the budget, that means we have to call out areas that are less important. So I guess on the east side, being that we've been so far from City Hall and it's so difficult to get people from the east side to make public comment and show up for council meetings, and they really want a bigger presence farther east. So I know East Portland Action Plan and a couple other groups are writing letters, because what I've been telling the groups that are very passionate about that is to write a short letter explaining why, so that they can be sent in and so that we have that information. But with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide so that we can go on to onboarding. Juliet?
Thank you. Sorry, just getting all my windows sorted out. Okay, the final element of our subcommittee's scope of work is onboarding of new council members. This item, we will review the data and information to date and propose next steps. Please keep in mind that this item is on a faster timeline than the previous two. Next slide, please. First, we want to briefly evaluate the data and information collected to date. Based on what we know so far, the current evaluation suggests that initial orientation must focus on a short list of high priority, big picture topics that will prepare the individuals and the team to perform effectively from day one. It will take full advantage. We need to take full advantage of the period between the November election and the January swearing in, and also to prepare a comprehensive council reference manual. Early in their tenure, new council must engage in a goal-setting process to develop a roadmap with a short list of council priorities for 2025, which are different from the city's priorities, including specific measurable objectives for themselves as a team. In addition, the mayor and auditor should participate, and it's essential to develop a detailed plan for council staff onboarding. Also, to get the right presenters and facilitators, and to create a clear delineation of responsibilities, expectations, and accountability for individual council members. Next slide, please. The subcommittee members working on onboarding already identified a set of questions for city staff to answer before they can propose more detailed onboarding recommendations. Tate White can provide some answers about that. And so, Tate, are you still there? And do you want to?
Yes, I'm
Some
here.
comments?
Can you
Huh.
all hear me okay?
You're a little faint,
No,
Is
it's
this,
very
is
low.
that better?
a little bit.
I'm gonna turn, the audio is a bit loud for me, so I turned it down, but it might have impacted my own output. Does that sound better?
No.
Oh, sorry, I don't really know what I can do. I'll just scream. All right, so these are great questions. Thank you all. For the first one about the 10 staff members for the shared council staff, funding for the anticipated classifications for these was incorporated into the current appropriation level targets that were approved by City Council on November 29th of last year. And so funding for these positions will be considered through the budget process, but it's good news that they were part of the current appropriation levels targets. Position descriptions will be complete before the end of this fiscal year, hopefully sooner than that. If the positions are funded in the current fiscal years, or the fiscal year 2024-25 budget, a hiring process will be launched for the city operations manager as early as July 1st. So the manager can build out their team and prepare for the new council's term in 2025. Expect hiring for additional shared staff to take place between fall 2024 and early 2025. Council aides will be hired directly by councilors, and their earliest start date will be when the incoming elected officials start their terms on January 1st, 2025. I'm going to keep moving since we're tight on time. For the hiring authority, we are looking at several models right now, including the future council president or a designee of the city administrator for that council operations manager. And then going forward, they would hire the other staff. This is an area that needs more work and resolution that we're working on internally. So we're working on that now. For the role of council members in the selection process, current commissioner offices are being engaged to inform the development of position descriptions for the central or shared staff. The first council operations manager will be hired by the chief administrative officer or their designee to start before the 2025 council takes office. And then discussions are underway to explore options for the future council presidents to hire future council operations managers. And then, of course, the future counselors will select and hire their council aides directly. And I think it'll be too repetitive about when everyone will be on board. I think I covered that in the first question. For the question on who is the authoritative point person for council members' questions and concerns, I'm assuming this question is about the 2025 council. And the answer is going to depend on what the question or concern is. Either the mayor or city administrator will be the key contact for the councilor's questions and concerns about city operations or administration, but the council operations manager is anticipated to serve as a key contact for objective policy and operational questions related to council needs. And then the question on why some orientation items cannot be addressed until elected officials are sworn in. So the Bureau of Human Resources has directed that counselors and their staff cannot be paid until they take office starting January 1st. The Bureau has advised that onboarding beyond providing necessary information, written materials, and individual meetings with the council operations manager or other select staff should not happen until after they are sworn in, effective January 1st, 2025. So the onboarding planning is exploring how to be responsive to this direction while also fulfilling the objective of setting the 2025 City Council up for success. And then who is ultimately responsible and accountable for planning and managing the onboarding process? So Chief Administrative Officer Michael Jordan is the project sponsor of the transition, as you know. Planning for the onboarding process has been integrated into the transition team's work plan. Myself, Tate White, is the project manager of the onboarding process, which includes leading the planning and coordinating with city partners, leading critical components of the onboarding process. The city partners we're working with include the auditor's office, the city attorney's office, the Bureau of Human Resources, the city budget office, and bureau directors. The incoming council operations manager is anticipated to manage the overall onboarding implementation. And yeah, that will continue ongoing. I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak really quickly to leave more time for you, but that's what I have. Happy to take any questions. Zach, are you first?
Sure. So my question is on that first bullet point. So it makes sense to ensure that you have the shared council staff director and legislative support staff on board by January 1st. So having the interim city administrator hiring that, but with the change of hiring authority flipping to the council president, is that there's been kind of I'm aware of conversations about kind of separation of power of having the city administrator overseeing that shared council staff. Is that budget then like turn January 1 when hiring authority shifts over to the council president? Does that change? Do they then directly report to the council president, or is it still they're reporting to the city administrator?
I think that's exactly what we're trying to get clarity on from our discussions with BHR and the city attorney's office right now. Our assumption, like we are recommending that we pursue this reporting structure through the council president to maintain that separation of powers. And my assumption would be that they would theoretically be reporting to the council president once they are in place. I think that answers your question, does it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so we only have 6 minutes left. If you, Joe and Amy, if you can give me a 2-minute point each, then we can finish on time.
I'll go quick. It's extremely concerning to think about doing no onboarding before January 1st for a number of reasons that we can outlay. Is there any way we can get a more detailed explanation or have a conversation around that? Because that's problematic.
I'm working. I'm actually elevating it to the project sponsor to discuss it more. Yeah, you know, I respect my colleagues in BHR, so I've I've heard their direction, and we are elevating that and having a broader conversation internally. And
Can you keep us looped in on that?
yeah, when I have updates that I can share, I will. Things are constantly moving around here.
Thanks, Amy. Please go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so Kate, that's why we asked, and you said that there are some exceptions to that, and we'd like to know exactly what those exceptions are, what can be done before, what can't be done before. I just want to say to everybody, I hope that we can move this forward quickly because we are on a faster timeline than the rest of the committee work. And January 1st, 2025 has the potential to be the beginning of a bright new future for Portland, and it has the potential to be the beginning of a brand new shit show. We've got a whole new group of people forming a whole new team, people who aren't necessarily familiar with the city of Portland, who almost certainly aren't familiar with the responsibilities of elected office, and who are going to have a whole lot of other demands on them. And so this really needs to be done right. It's critically important to setting up the new mayor and council for success. It can't just be done in any kind of pro forma way. And we expect GTAC to play a meaningful role in the planning and development of this.
And if I may really quickly, I will say what we know we are planning for and what can happen regardless of this ongoing conversation is to have a very comprehensive briefing booklet that we deliver to all the successful electeds. The council operation manager is supposed to be in place. They will be calling each member of council, reaching out to them and being available to answer their questions and point them towards that booklet and towards what resources we can provide them at that time. I'm not suggesting that's a final answer, but we know that at minimum, that is what we are planning for. So I just wanted to make sure and share that.
Thank you so much, Tate. We really appreciate that speed delivery of your information. So I'm just going to wrap up the meeting now with cover our last few slides. And we look to the onboarding group. We look forward to more onboarding recommendations at our next subcommittee meeting. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Because I do wonder for those who are involved, Juanita, Amy, Joe, I think in this initial set of onboarding recommendations, are the answers that Tate provided today enough for you to like keep working or no? Just to check, I just want to check in about that.
Yeah, I think that but personally, I would love to have her answers in writing. And because I think there's a lot of questions that elicited out of her answers, and there's a lot of clarification that needs to be made. So I will definitely hope that we can get those responses, those questions answered as soon as we can. So we can then again talk about it and decide if that is enough. Or if we need additional clarification. I'm very concerned, just as Joe is, about the timing for the onboarding of the new council.
And I'd like to say what Juanita said, except in a slightly different way. I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't had a chance to process the information. Those were genuinely questions that we felt we needed answers to, and we may need a little bit more, you know, as
No, perfect. I mean, I put this in the chat, but I will do.
Even if these questions are, you know, answered fully, they're going to lead to more questions. We'll do what we can.
Great. I just wanted to close the loop with the onboarding group. I'll work on a meeting summary that includes the answers that Tate did provide today, and I'll send them specifically. I mean, I'll send them to everyone, but to the onboarding group too, and you can kind of take a look, think, and if you have additional questions, please let me know. Thanks. Sorry, Julia.
No, that's okay. We still have 1 whole minute. I just want to say that the meeting recording will be posted on the committee's website. The subcommittee will present the draft letter to the full committee on February 6th. The co-chairs will meet on Monday to set that meeting's agenda. Once the agenda is set, we will know how much time we have to discuss a letter with the committee. And the fourth meeting of the subcommittee will be February 22nd. We will spend significant time discussing how to gather input on our work to date. Next slide, please. And I don't think I need to read you the proposed upcoming schedule. It is, sorry, and because these meetings are all posted on the transition website under events. Next slide, please. And I want to thank everyone for your participation today. I wish we had more time to talk about all this, but we are adjourned.